Hello, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about two movies, Barbie and Oppenheimer. These were both released on the same day, on July 21st. And it became this internet sensation that how opposite they were. One talking about Barbie and the other talking about the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb testing at Los Alamos, and later, as we know, what happened after that at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So the first question we have is, yes, it's true that everything has a spiritual dimension to it, but it doesn't mean that we always need to speak about a topic. For instance, my friend was discussing this, and he said, a hammer, you could talk about the spiritual dimension of a hammer, but you don't need to necessarily do that. People aren't necessarily interested in hammers. And here our question is, maybe it's too much. Maybe we don't need to talk about this topic. And I myself felt that last week. I said, you know what, I don't think that I don't really necessarily see the need to talk about these movies. But the more that I was researching and seeing behind the life and times of this Julius Robert Oppenheimer, I saw something fascinating. So I'm going to just begin with a little bit around the people that he surrounded himself with, and it's fascinating. In as it relates, tonight we're giving a class on Kabbalah, and he himself was very much interested in seeing beyond the physical dimension behind the surface. So first, I want to say that this class is sponsored in Refuah Shlema of Yerachmo Azriel ben Edel Shena, Refuah Shlema. And so that's the question: is this too much? Well, there's some fascinating accounts in Oppenheimer's life. He was a student. He was an assistant to another physicist by the name of Wolfgang Pauli. Now, Wolfgang Pauli is very well known in the world of physics. And it's someone that Oppenheimer very much admired and respected and emulated. He himself was very interested in understanding the psychology as it relates to physics. And he was going through some difficult times in his life, and he befriended a psychologist by the name of Carl Jung. They became very, very good friends. And Carl Jung was very interested in synchronicity. Right? This topic tonight is about two movies, the simultaneous theatrical release of two movies. So Carl Jung was very much interested in synchronicity. So they shared a kind of a shared passion for exploring the mysteries of creation. This Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Jung. A student, another assistant to Wolfgang Pauli, his name is Viktor Weisskopf. And Viktor Weisskopf also accompanied Oppenheimer in Los Alamos. They knew each other very, very well. Once Viktor Weisskopf met with Gershom Scholem. Gershom Scholem, as many know, was trained academically, but he translated Kabbalah into English very early on and popularized Kabbalah. So Gershom Scholem asked him, is there anything that's mysterious, anything that's uncovered in physics that you can think of? So Viktor Weisskopf said 137, the number 137. So this number 137, Rabbi Ginsburg in 2010 gave a series of classes. I had the privilege, the merit of organizing some of those classes. And when we were organizing it, we didn't understand that you can give a whole series of classes on one number, but true enough, fascinating series of classes, and it was published in a book in 2018 called 137, The Riddle of Creation. I recommend it very highly. It's available on Amazon. And in this book, Rabbi Ginsburg explains dozens and dozens of things in Torah related to this number 137. But at this time, this assistant of Wolfgang Pauli, this mentor of Oppenheimer, who was meeting with Gershom Scholem, Viktor Weisskopf was meeting with Gershom Scholem, and so Viktor said 137, this number 137, we don't know where it came from. We know the equations say to yield this number, but it's a very important number. It's alpha, it's called the inverse of the fine structure constant. And spontaneously, Gershom Scholem said, 137, that equals Kabbalah. So here we're giving a class on Kabbalah, and Wolfgang Pauli in his own writing cites Gershom Scholem. It's a suggestion, it's a hypothesis, but it's very easy to suggest the possibility that Oppenheimer himself heard from someone, one of his colleagues, this very thing, that 137 equals Kabbalah. He was also, again, Oppenheimer was interested and fascinated by this deeper world. I'll have a quote from Wolfgang Pauli. This was in the name of another physicist that accompanied Oppenheimer to Los Alamos. His name was Isidor Isaac Rabi. And he says, Wolfgang Pauli once remarked to me that Oppenheimer seemed to treat physics as an avocation, as a hobby, and psychoanalysis as a vocation. That Oppenheimer viewed that his main thing in life was psychoanalysis, seeing the beyond things, really understanding things in terms of how it relates to the psyche. So this is the person who was instrumental in the Manhattan Project, in all these events that ultimately led to the dropping of 2 atomic bombs. And he was consumed by the interest in the deeper dimension. And his colleagues, not only were they also similarly interested in these topics, but they also knew of the relationship to Kabbalah, which is a fascinating thing. So what does Kabbalah mean? Kabbalah, the first time the word Kabbalah appears in the 5 books of Moses is in Exodus 26:5. And it's as follows: these corresponding loops shall be like a woman toward her sister. These corresponding is makbilos. When clasped together, join the 2 sections of the covering drape of the tabernacle. So this is the tabernacle in the desert, and this is holding up the curtain around the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the house, the Ark of the Covenant. So it's lining them up, corresponding. So as we're going to explain, the whole work of our generation and the reason for this class and the reason why we're giving this is continuing this topic that very much fascinated Oppenheimer and his colleagues. This idea that you have a spiritual dimension that corresponds to the physical. And if you only could line them up, then you would see wondrous things. So as a disclaimer, we understand that many people, this was a tragic event. Many people died as a result immediately, and then the aftermath of the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The estimates range from over 100,000 to over 200,000, mostly civilians. And this is not by any means to take it to lighten that. But there's lessons, and there's lessons for us in our service of God. The reason for each one of these classes is to take home important lessons for us. And it may seem fun. We're relating to movies. We're relating to something that is something that's pop interest, cultural interest. But really, the point is to take home important lessons for us. That these are our modern day metaphors that we can use. So this class is actually based on a class that Rabbi Ginsburg gave 30 years ago on one of my favorite topics. It's one of my favorite classes. It's on the topic of natural consciousness. So this topic of natural consciousness in the Hebrew, that's mudaot tevit. Yes. And so this whole topic of tonight is, what does that mean to serve God in a natural way, and how does it relate to our topic for this evening of these movies as metaphors, and relating to our times, and ultimately to live our lives with complete joy and on fire and awake in our service of God. So mudaut tevit, natural consciousness, is for a purpose. That we're studying Torah, we're performing mitzvos. It's the natural flow of life, together with God. And specifically, the example that Rabbi Ginsburg brings in this class is eating and drinking. That we have to do things consciously. Everything we do has to be with fervor and conscious. We have to be conscious of it. We say a blessing before we eat. We're conscious of the acts. We're elevating sparks through the act of eating. There's a funny clip in the Barbie movie where she's in the real world and she's provided with a glass of liquid, and she's drinking, and it goes all over her. Because in the Barbie world, it's dreamlands. You're just pretending. You're pretending to drink. So the cups are empty. Here, there was actually liquid in the cup, right? So this idea, we can't be asleep at certain. There's as we're gonna discuss. There's times to be asleep and times to be awake. But if you're drinking, it's a time to be awake, because you have to be awake to the act. So that's just an example from the Barbie movie, and we're starting to understand, to explain that natural consciousness is to be in a state where we're doing, all our acts are conscious. It's not a playhouse, right? In the Barbie world, everything's playing house, right? But we're in this world to build the house for God, right? So that's in this world, to build the third temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple for God. But there's a time for playing, and there's a time for action. There's a time when it's okay to play house, and there's a time to actually build. So now we're in the awake stage of the class that Rabbi Ginsburg brings, and then he says the flip opposite, which is a fascinating. Anyone who's followed Rabbi Ginsburg, he's a foremost teacher in Kabbalah, and he'll explain in the same class both sides. So he starts off by saying how important it is to be awake, and then he explains how important it is to be asleep. So it's like a fine nuance. It's a fascinating thing. So what does it mean for a kid to practice adult life? That we're not yet doing it, but we're playing it. So Ruth Handler, who is also Jewish, Oppenheimer was also Jewish, saw the need for girls to have an adult doll. She saw that the kids wanted to play in an adult way with their dolls, but all the dolls were babies. So once she had this idea, her husband Elliot said, no one wants an adult doll. Who would want such a thing? So in Germany in 1956, she came across these adult dolls called the Lily doll. And she bought 3 of them, and then they made them themselves in this company called Mattel. L is for Elliot, and then his partner was Matthew. So you have this Barbie doll. So what is an adult doll? What's the difference? A child doll is you're practicing being a mother. You're practicing raising babies, raising children. To play with an adult means that you're practicing being an adult. You're playing all of these things that maybe you'll do as an adult. So we have this. Okay, so we're discussing two different dynamics here. And right now they seem complete opposites. We're talking about Oppenheimer and his interest in Kabbalah. Okay, we can understand he was interested in Kabbalah, or at least the spiritual dimension behind things. His colleagues were knowledgeable about Kabbalah, that's for sure. His mentor cited Gershom Scholem in one of his papers, in one of his writings. So he was definitely surrounded by it, and maybe he knew about about Kabbalah himself. And then Barbie is the transition from playing with babies to playing with adults, and this idea that we're going between a state of being asleep and a state of being awake, and that if we drink, we have to be awake, or else we may spill it all over ourselves, right? Like Barbie did in the movie. Okay, back to being awake. So what does it mean to be awake? It means that we're ignited, we're on fire. We learn it from Aharon, the high priest, that he lit the candles he lit the menorah in the temple, the candelabrum, to the extent that the flames rose on their own. And Rabbi Ginsburg says that this word, Ola Me'aleha, that it rises on its own, that's the word of natural consciousness. That you ignite someone, and then they're on fire forever. Once you it's called a lamplighter. Once you light, like a teacher. You teach, and then you see that your student is on fire. Just one day they become their own person, and maybe they start teaching, or they become observant in Torah mitzvot, or something like that. You see that moment where they catch fire, they're alive. So we all have this ability to light, and then to help another to be alive. But this word me'aleha is so fundamental to this topic of this evening, and it's called natural consciousness, right? To be alive, to be excited, to be joyful, right? The Barbie world is joyful, but we're going to say something very important. It seems that they're just dreaming, that you're just asleep, but sometimes it's important to be asleep. I was preparing this, and I was going over the section where Rabbi Ginsburg talks about what's an example of being asleep, a good example of being asleep. He says if someone offers you $1 million, but you have kavias itim b'Torah, you have your set times for Torah study, and you're in the middle of your set time for Torah study, you're asleep to it. You don't pay any attention. At that time that I was reading that, I was in a synagogue. Nearby were Hebrew speakers, and they were studying, and they were learning this very similar thing. I don't know exactly. I was trying to follow, but I was also trying to edit. They said $1 million. They kept on repeating this phrase in English, $1 million. And so first, you have to you learn the laws. You study Torah. And there's all types of laws of commerce and business, and not to take interest in certain situations and so forth, and not to cheat, not to steal. But then when it comes to the world, then you can make your $1 million. But while you're asleep to the world, then if someone offers you the $1 million, it's not the time. So it's right. What does a child do when they're playing with Barbie? They're preparing. They're preparing for all the dreams and all the things that they have. They're acting out. So it's a playhouse, but it's acting out. It's acting out that what types of a life they could have. So this Robert Ginsburg explains, how does that relate to Oppenheimer? So we had the result of the atomic bombs was fission, separation, right? What's fusion? Fusion is bringing together, seeing the unity in things. So someone who is in a state of natural consciousness sees the unity in everything. So we're gonna discuss that some more. But this idea, so now we're saying that the ideal state is natural consciousness. The ideal state is to be awake, but you also have to ground oneself in one's Torah learning. Okay. Okay, so one of the themes of Oppenheimer is that of consuming fire, right? The imagery of the bomb, the initial letters of eating and drinking is Aish, is fire. So we said that where did death and disintegration come to the world? That was through the sin of Adam, right? And that's depicted in the movie, right? So that was the experience at that time. But now we're entering a new era, as we're going to explain, a new world. A world where we're all serving together as one, with peace and joy and harmony and tranquility, right? What we're calling tonight natural consciousness, state of natural consciousness. So, talking about being on fire and saying blessings, and I was studying that again. I was in synagogue, and it's about this class is about seeing connections, making correspondences. So I was preparing for this class, and just as I was in this section and I was going over it, someone in the synagogue said, Talmud is what keeps the Jewish fire alive. Learning is what keeps the fire of being a Yid, a Jew. The first things that the German would do is prevent the learning of Torah. So it spoke to me, and it very much seemed very much relevant to our discussion. That here we have a movie, Oppenheimer, which is the depiction is of a consuming fire, but ultimately we're trying to get from that destruction and disintegration and death to a state of a holy fire, of being alive and being lit up in the service of God, me'aleha, to be on fire for God. Okay, so now we're going to get to the most important part of the class. This is the a monumental, groundbreaking thing. So if you, hopefully, this is if there is a take-home point from this class, it's this thing. And I'm just going to read. This is from the transcript of this class from Rabbi Ginsburg. Now, the most important thing that has motivated us to discuss at length and in depth this concept of muda'ut tavit, of natural consciousness, are the words of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said several times that we've reached a state in our communal history of the Jewish people that the normative way of serving God, as has been since the giving of the Torah to our present day, that's over. We've entered a new stage. Thousands of years. Now we've entered a new stage. That's been completed. And what's been completed? It's called avodat habirurim, the service of clarification. What's the service of clarification? Through the sin of Adam, there was a mixture of good and evil in the world. And so Oppenheimer depicts this very well. You have this, it's a struggle. You say that I'm good and you're evil, and they say you're evil and I'm good. And there's two sides to the debate, right? Just like the aftermath of the atomic bombs dropping. There's two sides to the debate, and there was debate and arguments between both sides, and that's this idea of dealing with moral equivalencies and trying to figure out, sift through and who's good and who's not, right? It's like a society who views anyone who breaks the law as bad, so they put them away. But maybe you should rehabilitate them. Maybe petty crimes shouldn't be punished so severely, right? So there has to be for a long time. This was the main mode of service. It's called avodat habirurim. That you have to align yourself with good, you do good, and then you're pushing away the evil. But the Rebbe said a tremendously monumental statement, I'm continuing to read, that what we've been doing for thousands of years, we've done, it's enough. And he didn't mean on an individual level, he meant on a communal level. That as a people, as the Jewish people, we've done enough of this service of clarification, and now we've entered a new service. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said this in the 80s. What is this new service? The new service is called avodat hayichudim, making unifications. What is making unifications? So it's like what we're doing now. When a Kabbalist makes a unification, it means his intention in his mind that through performing this particular act, this mitzvah, this prayer, saying these words, he knows that every word and every act has its spiritual source above. So he's connecting everything in the world to his service, to his divine service of God. So like we said, the examples that I had in synagogue of people talking about $1 million, people talking about being on fire for God, using everything, connecting everything in our service of God. In the Zohar, it calls this the unification of the higher waters and the lower waters, the kissing of the higher waters and the lower waters, the higher waters of divine wisdom, and the lower waters of the natural sciences, of physics, right? So connecting everything. That's what Oppenheimer was so interested in. But it's also the difference. It's also the difference between fission and fusion. This is what led me originally to this class, to find this class, and to ultimately to decide to speak about this topic. So I'm going to read again from Rabbi Ginsburg's transcript. As we said, everything is in its perfect place. The evil can be transformed, but it has to be put into place. That's bewilderment, right? You have to put people in their place, right? And this could lead to conflict. This could lead to wars. This could lead to fission. If we abstract it, the splitting of particles. Fission is the splitting of particles. Fusion. What's fusion? You have two light nuclei and you combine them together and you release vast amounts of energy. Instead of being destructive, it's constructive. It's clean energy. It can fuel the entire world if they can figure it out. So Robert Ginsburg says this, and he says that you can either have the process of fission or fusion. Right? You either have a vodas of Urim, the surface of clarification, of separation, of this is good and this is evil, or you have fusion. You have unity. You have two light nuclei, two people coming together, the world coming together. So just a supposition is that we talked about there's one ignition, right? Aaron, the high priest, is lighting the candle, and then it's lighting it by itself. Like we're in the period of history that's called the Friday afternoon, just before the Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath. And right before Mashiach comes, right before the redemption. And we're getting to the point where we're going to light the candles for Friday night, and it's going to burn into the Shabbos, into the Shabbat. And we said that the high priest lights it until it's me'alah, until it burns on its own. Shall have it until this fiery flame burns on its own. And we said that fusion takes ignition, but it takes many ignitions to make fusion. They were able to do it once in December, I believe, last December, and it made the news. Finally, they figured out how to do a fusion, a reaction, ignition. But some say it could take 10,000 of those to have a power plant a day, and they have to perfect these little balls, and it's a very complicated process right now. But what we're saying that if it's a postulation, maybe if this is really a metaphor, it would be an even better metaphor if fusion energy were created just by one ignition. That there is something called perpetual or continuous fusion. And I searched for it. I couldn't find any example of it in physics, anyone talking about this. But according to these metaphors, it would be, according to this Torah, it would be a wonderful, an even better metaphor if fusion energy, if they discovered this. That you can have, what in Oppenheimer and Einstein were concerned that fission energy would cause a chain reaction and destroy the world. Here we can have a chain reaction and usher in the world of Mashiach. Just like we have one good deed can spread, like chaos theory. You have a butterfly that flaps in one end of the world and then it has an effect in another end of the world. So we don't know the results of our actions, but it could be everlasting. It could just keep on going on and on. So that's just a thought. Just a thought that maybe ideal fusion is through one ignition, like the Shabbos candles. We light them and then they go on. Because what does it say of Mashiach? That we're entering Shabbos consciousness. It's a natural consciousness, but it's also a Shabbat consciousness. You don't burn lights on Shabbos. You don't do ignitions on Shabbos. Okay. So where does this all take us? So we had, there was a movie, the Lego movie, which was also beyond the world of fiction and reality. And the figure there was one person, there's the main figure. His name was Emmett, right? And what's Emmett? I mean, it's true, right? But here you have everyone, at least the women, are called Barbie. They're all Barbie, right? Because a kid, when they're younger, they have all types of interests. You have all types of things that you could be when you grow up. But they're all relatable. They're all someone I could be. By the way, who is Barbie and Ken? This is her two children, the founder of Mattel's two children, Barbara and Kenneth. Okay. So I like to end with a little bit of something humorous that is not from Rabbi Ginsburg, but something that came to mind. So Barbie, how do you spell Barbie in Hebrew?
Bet, Resh, Bet, Yud.
Bet, Resh, Bet.
אולי יש א' באיזשהו מקום. Bet, א',
The way I saw it was without an aleph, and it's okay. So last week, when we were discussing artificial intelligence and how the Hebrew letters are the ideal language for creating an artificial intelligence, it's called an LLM, large language model. So there I explained this two-letter root, Beis Resh. This was the first two-letter root of the Torah. This began all of creation. It began the Torah, and creation is the most creative act, right? This is creating the world. It's actually the root is in the first two words of the Torah, Reshis bara. In the beginning, God created. It also is, as mentioned in that class, also relates to blessing, to baruch, also bahir, which is to shine. But it relates to our Creator, to God. So in that last class, I said that the name that we could say for our programming model, our LLM, our large language model, we can name it Israel, Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes. And I explained there how we can name the reasons why we can name our model Israel. So now we're in the next week already, and we're talking about, well, what's natural consciousness? Is the time for study. Is a time for study and a time for action. There's a time for set times of study of Torah, and there's a time to act on those things. There's a time to study about the laws of business and a time to make that $1 million. But when you're studying Torah, you have to be asleep to making that $1 million. But what's the purpose of all of this? To enter into this place where everyone is the same, is that ultimately the Jewish people are called Or La'amim, led into the nations. And our job as all teachers to promote, to spread the awareness of the oneness of God throughout all of creation. So who are these people in Barbie lands? So if we look at the Hebrew, bar, that God created, Yud Beis, God created the 12 tribes, created the Jewish people. Why? In order to teach the Torah. To teach that sometimes you have to be asleep and sometimes you have to be awake, and to teach when to be asleep, when to be awake. Right? The whole topic of our class. And what's Ken? Ken is, yes, it's Bar Yud Beis. Yes, it's Barbie. Ken is, yes, King. That's just a fun little thing that I thought of on my own. But just to conclude, so here we have 70, 80 years since Oppenheimer, since the time that he and his colleagues and mentor were interested in Kabbalah. And here we're giving a class that's explaining that the times that they were living in are completely different than the times that we're in now. they were living in a time of clarification of good and evil. Now we're living in a time of unification. They were living in a time of fission. Now we're living in a time of fission. They were living in a time where you had to separate, and there was conflict, right? Now we're in a time of seeing the truth and the source and the unity behind everything. So now we understand what it means to issue a movie on Oppenheimer, to release it today. You're seeing what it was like back then with the new lens of this modern era. You're seeing how in the dark, how they didn't have what we have. We're so close to the redemption. We're in a new era already, as the larger Rabbi said. And it's just permeating. The job now is to just permeate all of reality with the consciousness of God and the unity behind everything. So Oppenheimer was about an individual, and Barbie is about the unity of the collective. And that's the take-home message. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the class, and stay tuned.